Final Fantasy XIV has robust tools for players that customize basically the entire HUD, and plenty of ways to adjust your controls for both keyboard and mouse and controller. And as a controller player myself, it is amazing to see so many options for customizing the experience. They even thought about and implemented a way to move your mouse cursor with the analog stick, or the touchpad if you're on console. Controller even has mouse over by default, no macros or add-ons required. This video started out as a improved hotbar layout for controllers, but then I thought I should explain the different ways to target enemies. And then further realizing I should just go over the stuff I've learned during my time playing this game on controller. So the scope expanded to be on all of that, and looking over every option I could find in the menu about controller to create what I feel is the most comprehensive guide to using a controller. But first and foremost is the hotbar itself. While the controller may only have 8 hotbars compared to the keyboard's 10, each hotbar on pad is 16 buttons instead of 12, and with 14's low action count, you'll never actually use every button regardless of your input method. This is ignoring space for things like emotes or gear sets, but not your potions. But you can have both the cross hotbar and normal hotbars visible at the same time, so no one is losing out on anything in this regard. I just didn't want to leave it out. Now then, let me detail how the hotbars actually work, and how to use them even better. This part is mainly for keyboard and mouse elitists who scoff at controllers but don't know how they work. Each of our hotbars are divided in half, and depending on if you hold R2 or L2, or whatever the back button on an Xbox controller is called, bumper, shoulder. Sorry, I have to look at my controller every time stuff is written in Xbox notation. I mean, come on, the X button is different across all 3 controller types. Anyway, when holding either of those shoulder buttons, you can use one of the 8 skills mapped to the face buttons, or a direction on the D-pad. You can also change the hold to a toggle, but future points won't work with this option unless you switch to mixed, but mixed defeats the purpose of using toggle. However, as the definitive controller video, I had to at least mention it as an option. And we have 2 ways of toggling between our different hotbars. The first is by tapping R1, which takes us to the next bar in order. This method only goes through hotbars you wish by using this menu. But if you're using 3 hotbars, you have 2 extra button presses from getting access to all of your skills. And then there's the possibility of being on the wrong bar and hitting the wrong button. Which would be the equivalent of, like, I don't know, using repelling shot to go into the wall because you held control instead of alt, and then wiping the raid. Why yes, I do know from experience. The other method is by holding R1, and you guessed it, press one of the face buttons or a direction on the D-pad, which you'll have to use for your non-combat bars. Though, for combat situations, neither of these are the best way to swap hotbars, but even some controller players don't know about, or don't use the better options. Sad face. Now that everyone is on the same page, we can finally delve deep into the best way, and the second best way to access more than 16 actions at a time. Allow me to introduce everyone to both the expanded cross hotbar and W cross hotbar. Very creative names, I'm aware. With the expanded cross hotbar, you can select one half of a hotbar for when you hold R2 then L2, which is different than when you hold L2 then R2. This option alone gives you access to 2 full hotbars in as few button presses as possible. The W cross hotbar gives you access to another 4 or 8 actions for double tapping either R2 or L2, depending on if this setting is clicked or not. Finally, there's an option to set your R3 and L3 to a variety of options, including macros. You can even change the rest of your controls, however there are some limitations. These extra options allow us pad players to reach a whopping 48 different actions with just using R2 and L2 in different combinations, with an even 50 if we include the L3 and R3 macros. And using those for macros should not be confused with using them for duty actions, which are used by holding one of the shoulder buttons like normal and pressing in the stick. For context, including roll actions, Scholar has the most unique actions at 34, or up to 40 with all of your pet actions, though 4 of those are completely useless, so we can cut those out, bringing the grand total to 36. Thus allowing 12 to 14 or more spots on your bar for macros and duplicate actions, and we will get into why that's important later. Most of the time macros are no good for doing a rotation, or even doing you any favors for weaving. This isn't to say macros are entirely useless though, and they do have some niche uses. Especially for controller, so this will be a short segment. Some generic uses are for putting a marker over yourself, or casting like an Astro card or a mid tank on a specific homie. You can also use the previously mentioned R3 and L3 for something you won't use very often, like, I don't know, say maybe Limit Break? It does provide one more very useful tool in combat that requires a little bit more detail. While keyboard can use this macro hit, there's almost no reason. But I do have some dark tech even keyboard mouse users might not know. And I did say almost no reason, not that there is no reason. So do stick around, you might get something out of this too. You can use macros to set ground target abilities like Asylum, Sacred Soil, or even Shikuchi to go to your target, target's target, or even a focus target. Or even any of the other targeting options available. All we have to do is make our macro /AC, the ability name in quotations, then open caret T close caret, or 2 T's, or F for target, target's target, or focus target. You can even use 1 through 8, or even target a specific marked enemy. Macros are kind of cursed however, and only execute one line per frame with no ability to be buffered. But fear not, loyal viewer, as we have workarounds that don't involve button mashing. Macros only execute for 1 frame, yes, but that's only if you have one line in your macro. We can repeat the same line multiple times to mimic action buffering. This gives us, at most, a 15 frame window to input the macro and have it work. And making a macro multiple lines allows the ability to come out instantly, no confirmation needed. One thing I recommend doing with your target macros is to have the final line not have any specific targeting parameters on it, so it will work even if you have nothing targeted, or if it is not in range. And for those times when you have no target, or wish to manually place your abilities, you can move the virtual mouse to aim, or the method I believe is better, moving your camera to put the desired location under the cursor, instead of moving the cursor to the location. One other minor thing to note, you can change the icon of your macro to another action, which you can use to show if the target for your ground target abilities are in range. It's not a complete one-to-one. The icon will tell you if you're in range if any part of the target circle is within its range, but the macro wants to be centered, but it's still a really good guide. Though probably much less so with how fat the bosses are. Though that leads me to my next topic quite nicely if I do say so myself. Controller has 3 different ways of tab targeting, and knowing how they work and when to use each one is invaluable. Because unlike other things where one option might be super niche, all 3 have uses. I'm sure everyone knows about using the directional pad to cycle through party members or tab through targets in the direction you want, up down for the party, or left right for targets. Which is great and all, but if stuff moves, or you move your camera, then the order of how you target can change it. But did you know? You can still use that targeting method with a shoulder button press if you tap R1 or L1 for right and left respectively. This method is exceptionally good for when you need to weave and swap targets, or if you use it in the toggle option. But you can also use up and down to cycle through the enemy list if holding down L1. This will always cycle through in alphabetical order. No, not the mob name, this little letter next to their name that all mobs get when they become aggro. It actually does have a use besides making stupid puns, like Liquid Handy. You can also use this type of targeting if the thing you're trying to target is off screen. Well, not really the most important thing. Keyboard mouse can only change what they target depending on if the weapon is drawn or the sheath. So like, when you put your weapon away, you can choose to only target non-enemies, and while your weapon is drawn, you can choose to only target enemies so you don't accidentally pull them out, or have less things you have to cycle through in combat. The controller has extra options allowing for a slightly deeper control of what you do or what you do not want to target. It's possible to cycle through these by holding the L button and pressing one of the face buttons. I tried to find some use for this early on when I started, but I couldn't. So if you have any use for this or something, I'd like to know in the comments. This is going to be the most subjective part of this controller guide, as what feels natural to me won't necessarily feel natural to another. Though I feel like at least these tips and my thought process will allow you to better craft hotbars for your controller. The most important rule is that comfort is king, and personally I prefer having the jobs feel as similar as possible, so I try to make all the combos as similar as possible, even if it means moving my roll actions around. While there's certainly merit to making sure all of your roll actions are the same because they get pressed less often, I find it more valuable to not have to think about where either your 1-2-3 combo is or your spammable damage GCD is in the case of healers. This is because of my short history with fighting games, where most of the basic stuff are universal buttons. Also because of this history, I do square, triangle, circle for my 1-2-3 to imitate a light, medium, heavy chain, with X being my job specific button, like Shadow of Death for instance. As for D-pad inputs, I like to place anything with a cast bar or my movement ability on them, and put as few instant cast abilities as possible and instant cast GCDs as an absolute last resort. This is because you need to use your right hand to tap the D-pad while moving, which is at best annoying. So it makes perfect sense for things that can't be done while moving to go there. I also like to put things that make me go forward on up, and things that make me go backwards on down, because it makes the most sense to me. Hopefully I made my thoughts on this part make sense. So, because the cross hotbar can expand it, constantly check to see what shoulder button is held down. We can hold R2, then hold L2, then let go of R2, then hold R2, and let go of L2 to cycle through all of the hotbars without ever going back to a neutral state. We can do this from the W cross hotbar as well, and letting go of L2 brings us back to the W cross hotbar. This is most useful when combined with weaving. Combined with a lack of action below, opens up a ton of creativity for design layouts. Let me use my Reaper bars as a reference. My generic GCDs are on the right side of my main hotbar, with my gauge GCDs on the left side of my main hotbar. Gluttony and Shroud are both on my expanded hotbars, which is important because no matter if I have R2 or L2 up, which is rotation dependent, I can just hold the other and use those important buttons without needing to think of the order I'm pushing, or accidentally doing the wrong order. Just look at how smooth my burst window is. Before we finish, there are a couple quick topics left to briefly discuss. First, if you go into hotbar settings under the character config and tab over to cross, at the bottom of this tab is something called a WXHB input timer. The higher this value is, the more time you have to double tap a shoulder button to gain access to the WXHB. The second quick thing to note is that by default, when using a controller, any inputs from your keyboard go directly into your chat box. However, if you have one of these and disable direct chat, you can keybind things to your keyboard buttons to quickly target any party member or use skills if you put them on a normal hotbar. Third, this option right here breaks your WXHB into two elements to be moved separately around the HUD. And lastly, if you press an OGCD while casting on a different target, the ability will come out as soon as the spell is finished without changing your target. In conclusion, by default, meaning without customization, the controller has limited applications, but is still more than playable for most of the content in the game. However, when delving into the depths of customization, pad is competitive with keyboard and mouse in even the most difficult of contexts. Until next time.